Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the Nutrition 101 series. So if you guys are new around here, my name is Becca. I am a registered dietitian and I have talked about all sorts of topics from macronutrients, digestion, gut health, menstrual cycles, so many different things in this nutrition series so far. And today we're going to be talking all about gluten. So it seems like everyone is on a gluten-free diet nowadays, and some of those reasons may be totally valid and maybe some of those reasons aren't totally necessary. So while there is a lot of hype around gluten and whether or not it should be in your diet, there is also a lot of science around gluten and whether or not it should be in your diet. So in this video, I'm just going to kind of break everything down, and my hope is that by the end of this video, you can just be better informed on gluten, what exactly it is, what it can do to the body depending on who you are, and that way you can make, the most or the best informed decision for yourself and decide if it has a place in your diet or not. So before we even dive into the whole gluten topic, I just want to define what exactly gluten is, because I think some people may not even know. And it really is just a protein that is found in wheat, but also in other types of grains like barley and kamut, I think is how you say it. It also, it doesn't naturally occur in oats, but there can be some cross-contamination and it can be in oats. So it's in just a lot of different grain or wheat type products, and it is just a protein. And if you have already been following me, you know that I am a huge advocate for intuitive eating and not necessarily just cutting anything out of your diet and just eating a little bit of everything. But I also totally recognize that there are certain people that should absolutely be avoiding gluten, so we're going to break it all down and let's talk about them first. So first and foremost, people that should be absolutely avoiding gluten and completely eradicating it from their diets and their life in general is those who have celiac disease. So celiac is an autoimmune disease and it can be diagnosed via test, and a lot of people actually have celiac, and it seems like more and more people all the time are discovering that they are celiac. It causes a lot of GI distress, and we will get into why, but actually some people don't have any symptoms, which is kind of scary because celiac really can do a lot of damage to your body. So when people with celiac disease consume gluten, it seems to wreak havoc on their digestive system, both as far as presenting with symptoms, but also it physically damages their digestive tract. So let's just dive into that a little more. So all people, whether you are a celiac or sensitive to gluten or just a regular person that has no issues with gluten, whenever we consume gluten and it ends up in our intestines, what we actually secrete is something called zomulin, and zomulin is responsible for opening up what's called the junctions in between our cells. So if you've seen my gut health video, I go really in depth and talk about the intestinal lining and how it all works. So you should watch that video to get more of a background on what I'm talking about. But basically in between all of these epithelial cells in the lining of our intestine, which is where all of our food eventually has to pass through, we have these little junctions in between each cell that kind of act as doors. And zomulin has the ability to tell the body to open up these doors so things can go through. So when we eat gluten, it opens up our intestinal wall, which sounds not good because that makes it sound like our gut can be then permeable, which is not good. But of course, stuff does have to pass through our intestinal wall, so things do have to get across, but we want to make sure that they are digested properly and that only stuff that is supposed to be getting across is getting across. So the problem here is people with celiac disease produce way more zomulin than the average person, and the average person, for some reason, they can have zomulin produced and no GI effects, damage, anything can occur. But those with celiac disease have this huge amount of zomulin, so it ends up keeping those tight junctions, those little doors that are supposed to be remained closed for the most part, it keeps them open way longer than they're supposed to, and therefore makes the celiac gut very permeable, and a lot of things are passing through that are not supposed to pass through, so it can cause a whole lot of GI distress. But also what is scary about celiac disease is it actually starts to literally break down and destroy the microvilli. Again, I talked about this in the gut health video also the digestion video, I believe. But basically they are all these little finger-like projections in the lining of our intestines, and basically they just increase surface area. That is their main purpose. So instead of being a flat line, our intestine goes like this, so we have so much more surface area to absorb. But when celiacs consume gluten, it actually destroys those little microvilli and therefore reduces their amount of surface area to absorb nutrients, so therefore their absorption of nutrients goes way down, and this is not good. Okay, so that is celiac disease in a nutshell. So basically it creates gut permeability, and it really reduces the absorption of our guts because it destroys those microvilli. So if you have celiac, you absolutely want to avoid gluten because it really absolutely can harm you. Now, moving on to the next population that may want to avoid gluten or keep it out of their diets. This one is not quite as black and white. It's a little more murky, and that is those who have gluten sensitivity. So the good news about gluten sensitivity is when you consume gluten, if you're non-celiac and you're just sensitive to gluten, it's not actually going to do or create damage within your GI tract like it does in celiac with the microvilli. However, it is going to create gut permeability again, because that zonulin, it just for some reason has an effect on these people, and it creates that kind of leaky gut, and also it's just going to create GI distress in general when consumed. As far as I know, there is still no definitive test for gluten sensitivity, like there is a definitive diagnostic test for celiac. And the gold standard, I guess, is still just an elimination diet to see if your symptoms improve and if you feel better off of gluten. So these people, again, if you are gluten sensitive, you can eat gluten. It's not going to damage the lining of your intestine, but it is going to create maybe some other issues as far as leaky gut goes, and also it's just, you're not going to be very comfortable when you do consume that gluten. So both celiac disease as well as gluten sensitivity are very real things, and if you are someone who struggles with either one of those, avoiding gluten in your diet is, especially if you're a celiac, a very good idea. If you for any reason suspect that you may have celiac disease, you should absolutely go get it checked out, get tested for it, and at least be able to rule it out, because like I said, it really can do some serious damage, and it's not something you necessarily want to, you know, avoid or just kind of play around with, because it can be pretty harmful. But at the same time, I will say that gluten has definitely been demonized in our society, and I do think that there are a lot of people out there who are on gluten-free diets that maybe it's not totally necessary, and maybe they don't even know why they're on the gluten-free diet. They just heard that it's healthy and they want to be healthy, so they're doing it. So let's just play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Whenever we are talking about the consumption of food and how it relates to GI distress or GI issues, we can't not talk about the gut-brain axis. I talked about this in my gut health video, but I'm going to talk about it again here because I think it is really important to note. So the gut-brain axis, or GBA for short, basically is just the connection, the heavy connection of our brain to our guts. This may be totally new to you. You may have never heard of this, or you may be thinking that I'm off my rocker. The brain's all the way up here, the gut's all the way down here. They probably don't really cross communicate all that much. But if you think about it, have you ever had a time where you were really nervous and maybe anxious and it gave you diarrhea? Or you found out some really horrible news and you literally felt sick to your stomach? That is the gut-brain axis. There is so much interconnection between our brains and our digestive tracts. It is crazy. Now, when it comes to consuming gluten, the gut-brain axis is very relevant, because I think there are lots of people out there, not necessarily by their fault, but you know, they're taught or told by whoever that gluten is bad, and gluten is just, you know, we shouldn't be eating it, it's causing inflammation in your gut, and it's doing all these bad things, and it makes you feel sick, and you know, the list goes on and on. And if you internalize that and you believe it, and then you go and you eat some kind of wheat-based product, whether it's pizza, or you have a burger, or you have a cheesesteak, or any kind of bread, or pasta, or pancakes, whatever. If you go and eat that food and the whole time you're thinking, this is gonna upset my stomach, this is gonna upset my stomach, I'm not supposed to be eating gluten, gluten is bad for me, guess what's gonna happen? It's probably gonna upset your stomach, because there is so much communication between the brain and the gut. Also, another really important thing to mention is stress. Stress, no matter what the source is, whether it specifically comes from stress around eating and eating behaviors and, you know, bad foods and all of that. Or maybe it's just general stress from other areas of your life, work, kids, family, house, bills, whatever. If you are under a lot of stress, it's going to wreak havoc on your gut. So maybe you are someone who is experiencing a lot of GI distress and you may think that it is gluten and you may want to try cutting it out, and then maybe the gluten doesn't work, so okay, I'll also cut out something else, and then I'm going to cut out this, I'm going to cut out this, because you're desperate to find what it is that's upsetting your stomach, because it's so annoying and it's frustrating to not have your stomach cooperate and feel normal, but it may just be the stress that is causing it. I remember I once had a client who was convinced that she had a problem with gluten, but then she would tell me that every once in a while she would have some and it wouldn't upset her stomach at all. And we really just figured out that it was absolutely stress. Sometimes she would eat pizza and she would be crying on the bathroom floor all night in so much pain. Other times she would eat pizza and she would be completely fine. Not a symptom, nothing, felt fine. And really it just comes down to this woman was under a lot of stress, and the stress was triggered at certain times, and when it was really triggered, she had a really hard time digesting whatever she ate, gluten or not. And other times when she was kicking back, relaxing, and wasn't really under, you know, acute stress from something, she was fine. Also, another point I want to make, just again here playing devil's advocate, so people will go on gluten-free diets again because they just maybe want to feel better or be healthier. They may not even necessarily know what it is, or they know that it's potentially causing GI distress, so they cut it out. And a lot of these times people do feel better. Now, this could be because they truly do have some kind of issue or sensitivity to gluten, or maybe they are even celiac. But something that I tend to think about is, and again, this isn't for everyone, but just playing devil's advocate, something to think about and kind of gnaw on, is when you cut out gluten from your diet, that also cuts out a lot of like junk food options that are available. Of course, there is so much availability of gluten-free foods now, so you can get pretty much any kind of, you know, wheat-based product that you used to eat in gluten-free form, but they're not as readily available at restaurants and things like that. So you may go out to a restaurant with friends and you're on a gluten-free diet, and say, you know, most of the things on the menu have wheat-based products. So that means the burger with the bun, pizza is off limits, cheesesteaks if you're from Philly or from near Philly like me, they are certainly off the menu. And there are so many things that may be not able, you know, you cannot eat, so instead you opt for the salad, or you just get some grilled chicken and vegetables because that's gluten-free. So something that I like to think about is, you know, people when they go on a gluten-free diet and feel so much better, is it the gluten that they've cut out and now feel better? Possibly, very possibly. But it could also just be that they are just eating a less processed food diet in general, and maybe are just making healthier choices, you know, most of the time, because a lot of the foods that are considered junk foods, which again, we don't have to avoid them, we can all eat in moderation here, but they may contain gluten and therefore are off limits, so they stop eating those kinds of foods. Okay, and then another point I wanted to make, you guys know I always have a lot to say, is the wheat products that we typically have nowadays are not what they used to be. So if we go back 100 years ago or so, you know, our great grandparents, they weren't eating these super processed breads that we now have available to us today. So if you go stroll through the bread aisle in the grocery store and you flip over and you look at the ingredients, you're gonna see a full paragraph. Not only do they add extra gluten to most of our bread products nowadays, you'll actually see gluten added in there. You'll also see a laundry list of other ingredients that don't typically belong in bread. So you're gonna have all kinds of stuff in there, and that is because, you know, manufacturers want to make this really soft, plushy bread that is super shelf stable and is going to stay soft and pliable for weeks on the shelf, when really bread can only last a couple of days before it starts to get stale if it's just made how bread is typically supposed to be made. I know for a fact, for me personally, whenever I consume regular bread that just is like off the shelf, I typically go for the bakery section. I try and get like sourdough or wheat bread that just has like literally the bare minimum ingredients, all you actually need to make bread, which by the way is not a lot, especially if it's sourdough. It's literally water and flour and maybe salt. But I personally like to go for those because I found that when I have the more processed bread that isn't really bread with all the extra ingredients and adding gluten and all of that, I find that it doesn't sit as well as in my stomach. It doesn't necessarily upset it to the point where I have GI distress, but I can just feel, because I do eat intuitively, I pay attention, I'm tuned into how food makes me feel, and I always find that it just sits a little funny in my stomach because it just has, I don't know, maybe it's, who knows, it could be the extra gluten, it could be all those ingredients, who knows? So in that case, is it actually the gluten that's bothering your stomach, or is it just the overly processed grain product with a bunch of added ingredients that is maybe not making it sit so well? Also, when going back 100 years or so, again, we didn't have all these additives in our grain products. They were very simple and real, if you will. But also a tradition that has kind of fallen off, but used to be a staple, and still is a staple in, you know, cultures around the world, is soaking grains. And by soaking them, not only does it make the nutrients more bioavailable, but it actually does break down certain things in that wheat or those grains that makes them a little bit difficult to digest. So this is something that we always used to do and now has kind of just fallen off. So again, interesting. So, should you cut out gluten? That is totally up to you. That is a decision that you can make for yourself. You are the keeper of your body and you are in control of everything that goes into it. So if you do feel like potentially gluten is causing you some GI distress, it doesn't hurt to cut it out and try an elimination diet. You guys know that I'm really careful when it comes to cutting things out because I think it can create a lot of stress. And like I said, it may have absolutely nothing to do with the gluten. It absolutely could, but it could certainly be stress or just the types of grains that you're eating. It can really be a lot of other factors. It can just be the fact that you think that it is making your stomach upset and that's why it's making your stomach upset. So I would say go into it with a grain of salt, listen to your body. Again, it doesn't hurt to attempt it and try it out, but just, you know, really think about all the things that I talked about today and go into it knowing that's maybe not going to be a perfect solution and that you really should look at all factors of your life when trying to determine and figure out, you know, what's going on with your gut. So that is it for this video. I hope that you guys found it helpful and were able to learn something from it. And hopefully now you know a little bit more about the gluten and the whole debate behind it and whether or not it's something you want to consider removing from your diet. If you guys enjoyed this video, I would absolutely love if you could give it a thumbs up and make sure to check out the other videos in the nutrition series, Nutrition 101 series, because they are full of information. And if you are enjoying my videos in general, I would absolutely love for you to subscribe and join my little community here on YouTube. But that is all. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.